Friday, March 20th, 2026. And of course, a lot's going on in the world, and we'll be talking about that here on Pod TV and World Edition and seeing a number of these stories and what's taking place with a number of these stories and all along those lines. On a holiday of renewal, Iranians are mourning and fearful. So that's one of the stories that we're hearing in the news and all along those lines. So Norris has taken on a different meaning for Iranians this year amid the conflict and fear. So definitely that's something that folks are talking about in the world news and all along those lines. So definitely that's something that folks are paying a number of attention to and seeing what's on their mind with that. Iran developing a vetting system for the Strait of Hormuz transit, according to a report coming out of that country. So about 90 ships crossed the Strait of Hormuz as Iran exports millions of barrels of oil despite the war. So definitely that's something that folks are talking about as well. And a diary of war from an unlikely author, the son of Iran's president. What Ali Larijani said on NDTV Walk the Talk in 2013 on Iran's nuclear ambitions. Israel is rapidly killing Iran's top leaders. Experts warned the strategy could backfire. That's something that folks are talking about as well. And Israel launches more strikes on Tehran as Iran continues attacks on Gulf oil facilities. So definitely that's something going on as well as the Israel-Iran war is in day 20. And Netanyahu says a revolution in Iran requires a ground offensive. Trump says Israel went rogue, plus what else should you know this morning, according to some reports from ABC. And Eid al-Fitr holiday announcement. So some folks are talking about that as Saudi Arabia confirms the end of Ramadan and a look at Eid al-Fitr and how Muslims celebrate that Islamic holiday. So definitely that's something that folks are talking about as well. So lots going on in the world. Anthony Albanese was heckled at a Sydney mosque Ramadan event. So Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, was heckled at a Sydney mosque Ramadan event, and I believe that was sometime yesterday, and all along those lines. Australian mosque protesters heckled him over his Israel stance, and definitely that's something that is going on in the Australian side of the world. And Netanyahu says Iran is being decimated, but revolution requires ground component. Iran war boosts Netanyahu and bruises Trump and Gulf states. So as Iran retaliates on Gulf energy sites, Netanyahu says it can no longer enrich uranium. So that's something that folks are talking about as well. And how unacceptable Orban defeated the EU again, but maybe for the final time, is what's being reported in Politico EU. So Hungary is Urban accused of disloyalty and blackmail over the Ukraine loan veto. So that's something that folks are talking about as well. Trump and Iran dominate the agenda as Europe leaders meet, and definitely there's a lot going on in that space as well. And UK health officials are investigating a Kent meningitis outbreak. So, a deadly meningitis outbreak prompts college students to call for a campus shutdown. So, meningitis case linked to Kent outbreak rise to 29 as students queue for the vaccine. So, definitely that's something else that's going on in the world in terms of health and all along those lines. So, like I said, a lot's taking place in the world, and I've got Rick Rosner joining me, and we'll see what he's got on his mind as well, and we'll see if others join us as well as we have these deep conversations about what's going on in the world and around the world and all in that kind of way. So, like I said, there's a lot taking place, and we're always glad to be reporting on that. Let's see what's happening in the U.S., and then I'll bring in Rick, and we'll see if other folks join us as well. But Cesar Chavez abuse allegations. Dolores Horte speaks with ABC News, and Cesar Chavez's name, once an honor, now carries a stain that officials want to scrub. So definitely that's some people are talking about as well, and all along those lines. And remains of Jimmy Gracie recovered it. That was the University of Alabama student that was missing in Barcelona. So fraternity speaks out following the death of James Jimmy Gracie. So definitely that's something that folks are talking about as well. And Trump stretches America first on Iran. His voters are going along with it. Most believe Trump will send U.S. troops into Iran, and Trump hit by a scathing poll about the major war plot. So it doesn't look like it's doing all that well for him in terms of the notion of his popularity. U.S. Commission of Fine Arts approves a Donald Trump gold coin design. So commemorative Trump coin should be as large as possible, key commission says in granting design approval. So the U.S. Mint can begin to produce Trump commemorative gold coins. So Trump's 24-karat gold coin approved by a hand-picked federal panel. So it looks like he's going to get his gold coin and all along those lines. And the U.S. considering occupying Karg Island to force Iran to open the Hormuz Strait, says a report. So Trump is mulling the risky Karg Island takeover to force Iran to open the strait. And we'll see how that plays out as well. So, like I said, lots going on in the world. I'm going to bring in, I will bring in my special guest, David Wu, and then I've also got Rick with me as well. But David Wu has joined us, and we've also got Sasha Starr as well. So, David, I know you've written a book, and the book deals with a little bit about the world situation. It sounds like it's a fiction book, even though it's got some facts in it as well and everything. But share a little bit about your book and also your take on what's going on in the world. We got a chance to do a little bit of that yesterday, but I know you had that siren go off.
Sure. I mean, and by the way, siren can go off again. So, like right now, Iran seems to be wants to demonstrate in the last 24 hours that it's quite capable of hitting Israel. So I've been going in and shelter all day the last 24 hours. But anyway, thank you for this opportunity to talk about my book. So, as you probably know, I hold on. So I spent the last 20 years, working on Wall Street, and my career actually is taking me all over the world. And, it's actually very funny because I did very well on Wall Street, but my wife was always very unhappy about the fact that I made a career on Wall Street, because she said, well, every time she had to introduce myself, oh, so my husband makes a living helping rich people to get even richer. Okay. So when I finally retire, I said to her that I'm going to do something good I want to do something that would give back. Okay. And from that point of view, I think the main goal here is trying to share what I know, about the workings of the world with everybody, regardless of their levels. In fact, I want to make my version of the world as accessible to everybody as possible, regardless of their background. Because I actually believe that today, a lot of there's just too many people going around, especially in the age of the internet, social media. There are too many people who have no idea about the workings of the world, who are going around talking as though they're experts and so on and so forth. So I actually think, it's unfortunate, but the world, is not that complicated. And there are people who are spinning stories that's simply not true. So what I want to do, I think I believe I have earned the right, to be able to actually tell people what's going on. I've got a PhD in economics from Columbia University. I started my career at the International Monetary Fund. I went to Wall Street. I was one of the top ranked, basically, macro thinker on Wall Street for many years. And on top of that, I'm an American. I was born in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Taiwan. My parents came from China. I was educated mostly in the US, but I lived in Europe for 10 years, and I'm now living in Israel. So I think I have a pretty good global perspective. So therefore, for the first time in my life, I would say 10 years ago, I decided that I was confident enough about what I know about the world that I wanted to share with people. And then because I didn't want to write another boring policy book or history book, which will basically sell to 5,000 people, I decided I want to write a novel that actually will help people make sense about how the world became what it is today. Because I think we're in a big mess, but if there's any chance we're going to get out of it, it's very important for everyone to understand how we got into this mess in the first place. And what I want to basically show in this novel is the role that everybody played in this mess that we got to. And it doesn't really matter whether you're rich, you're poor, you're young, you're old, where you live, and so on and so forth. In a way, this has been a dance macabre. Part of it is about essentially the butterfly effect, unintended consequences of globalization. But in any event, I want to write a novel that everybody can relate to. So, and I think this is the sort of the vision here, which is, let's try to fix the problem. But to fix the problem, we have to understand where the problem basically came from and to what extent your role, because it's not like, because I mean, we talk, even your station, right? I mean, like, people very often talk about problem as though the problem is other people's problem. In a way, we're all in this together. We're definitely in this together, and it's very important for us to actually understand our role in this before. So, as an economist, I sort of basically try to put a human face on globalization, which I think has been the most consequential story in the world in the last 25 years.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I brought in Rick and we'll bring in Sasha as well. I know that you've also done a lot of work on the whole notion because we talked about the with the state of what's going on with Israel and the war that's existed between Israel and Iran and the U.S. and Iran as well and everything. But I also know, because I know Sasha has been involved in a show called Modern Investment, that you have also had some role in the Bitcoin role as well. So I just wondering your thoughts around where Bitcoin is, because I just mentioned that Trump's got his own coin now, and I know that a lot of people are wondering about that. And then
Well, hold on.
research on you. I saw
Crypto
David.
is
Hold on. I'm talking to David. I saw David had some involvement in Bitcoin as well. So I just wanted your take on Bitcoin.
Sure. I think, listen, I've been, actually, it's, one of my claims to fame was that I was the first Wall Street analyst who initiated coverage on Bitcoin. And believe it or not, was 2013. Okay. So from that point of view, the history of Bitcoin, I actually have a very small place, because I actually, at the time, make the case that Bitcoin actually serves a pretty productive purpose. But there is no doubt in my mind, at this point, Bitcoin has gone absolutely, like, it's now total madness in terms of the evaluation. And let me tell you this. I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, obviously, despite the pullback we've seen in Bitcoin over the last 6 months, Bitcoin is still 30% higher than where it was the day Trump was elected as president, right? And then, well, the reason is because a lot of people bought Bitcoin because they thought that Trump, was beholden to the crypto community, because he took a lot of money from the crypto community for his campaign. And therefore, people thought, well, Trump now have to basically pay back, and that would be very bullish for Bitcoin. Now, I think a lot of people misunderstand that deeply. Okay. Trump, within crypto is a very big universe. Trump only cares about one piece of it. And that one piece of it has nothing to do with Bitcoin. Okay. That one piece of it that Trump is interested in promoting, which he is now personally invested in and so on and so forth, is stable coins. Okay. Now, I don't you know what stable coin is, but stable coins, unlike Bitcoin is basically, the valuation of Bitcoin changes every day. Stable coin is called stable coin because it's pegged to the US dollar. So it's 1-to-1. That's the idea. Okay. Now, what is interesting about stable coin is that, if you actually look at the only piece of crypto legislation that has been adopted, passed into law since Trump's presidency, is the so-called Genius Act, which was all about stablecoin, making stablecoin legitimate. And guess what? Let me explain to you why Trump likes stablecoin and hates Bitcoin. Trump likes stablecoin because, first of all, as I told you before, stablecoin is linked to the US dollar. In other words, Trump sees stablecoin as a digital extension of the US dollar, right? Trump is all about, wow, we want to make the US dollar great. He wants to basically preserve the dollar's reserve currency status. So for him, stablecoin, which is pegged to the dollar, actually essentially expands the footprint of the US dollar. The second thing, what Trump likes about stablecoin, which was actually passed into law last year by Congress, is that stablecoins have to be backed by US government bonds. So any issuers of stable coins, they have to buy, for every basically $1 worth of stable coin that they're issuing, they're required to buy US government bonds. Now, as you know, the US is running a massive budget deficit, of 6% of GDP. They need every penny they can get. So Trump says, well, why not? If you want to basically issue crypto, you got to basically buy US government bonds. This is the reason why, Trump basically threw his full support behind stablecoin. His family has also been involved in stablecoin, so they've done very well there. And stablecoin, as a result of basically the legislative, essentially certainty that's now behind us, stablecoin has seen a 500% increase in terms of volume, in terms of cross-border transactions. It's a good thing. But Trump doesn't give a shit about basically Bitcoin, because Bitcoin does the opposite, because Bitcoin undermines the US dollar. Bitcoins don't have to invest in US government bonds. In fact, every dollar that goes into Bitcoin is coming out of the pocket of Uncle Sam. So why would Trump want to encourage competitors to US government bonds competitive to the US dollar? You know what? Honestly, this is the reason why Trump has not even so much lifted a little finger to help Bitcoin. This is why all these idiots will pie into Bitcoin and thinking, wow, Trump loves Bitcoin and this and that. You know, Trump cannot give a damn about Bitcoin. And this is the reality. And then, but again, a lot of people in the MAGA world, they don't really understand. They're buying these things, whatever, because they're stupid. Anyway.
All right. So I have a couple questions. And one is, I'm on X a lot, and I see hundreds of people who think they're geniuses because they're in crypto. And the whole field of crypto looks like a trap for schmucks. So that's question one. Is that right? Question two is, you made me sad yesterday when you said, as long as the war goes on, the stock market's going to go down every day. You shouldn't be in the stocks. So my question for both you and for Sasha is, when we finally decide to quit this war, will the market recover, or are we screwed for a while?
Sure. I think let me just come back to your question about crypto, right? I mean, it's actually very interesting because I honestly, at this point, because crypto is complicated. Nobody's saying it's not complex, complicated. This is why people like it, because they don't understand it. People tend to fall in love with things they don't understand. Because if you don't understand something, it seems interesting, intriguing, whatever you have to say about it makes you look sophisticated. I think a lot of it has to do with that. Now, let me tell you this. It's very simple. When it comes to basically crypto for the most part, okay, if you look at the fundamental issue I've got with crypto is that it's non-productive. It doesn't actually do anything. Okay. Look at it, what percentage of trend, Bitcoin, it's not like, Bitcoin became around like, in the last 3 years. It's been around since 2013. And there has not been an increase in terms of shares of economic activities that is actually denominated using Bitcoin. In other words, that stores continue to resist taking Bitcoin as a means of payment. If for anything else for that matter, that should give you already a very strong indication after basically 14 years. There's been no progress in terms of the general acceptance of Bitcoin as essentially means of payment or means of transaction, so on and so forth. But what I can tell you, what most people get it wrong about Bitcoin, the MAGA people see Bitcoin as, essentially a vehicle for liberty. Right? This is why they confuse Bitcoin with political freedom. They somehow think that if the US government is going to come after your money, that if you're parking crypto, somehow you're going to be absolutely safe. That is so false, it's not even funny. Because in fact, the whole thing about Bitcoin is that every transaction that's done through Bitcoin is registered and recorded in the so-called blockchain. And the blockchain is indestructible. It's going to be here in a million years from now. In other words, the US government can track every single transaction of Bitcoin. This is why they've been able to recover a lot of money that was stolen, Bitcoins, and so on and so forth. So from that point of view, people are mistaken in thinking that somehow Bitcoin is going to be out of the reach of the US government. Uncle Sam, that's the biggest bullshit I've ever actually heard. And then if people believe that, it's only because they have no understanding how the entire financial system works. As I'm saying before, there's just too many basically people who basically, they've taken economics 101 and they think that they know everything about everything. And then they feel like, they're posting on X, on YouTube, whatever, as though they, this is why this is the reason why the world is getting worse and worse, because the general understanding is getting worse and worse. People who are opinion makers, they know less and less. And this is the biggest problem. Now, in terms of the stock market, let's come to that. Again, I just got up literally just before I jump on this call. I was on a call with a billionaire hedge fund client, okay, of mine. Okay. I mean, this guy, a very smart guy. He's a French guy based in London. And we're just talking about, I was like, it's killing me. Like the stock market has gone down a bit, but not that much. It's like, well, what do you think? Because, this guy, he runs a $30 billion hedge fund, one of the most successful hedge funds, I would say in the last 3 years. This guy is a bit of a household name. His name will not be basically mentioned on this call. But I was thinking, what are you hearing from people? He's saying, well, everybody's convinced. The reason why nobody wants to sell stocks is because everyone he talks to, That is from his salesperson at Goldman Sachs to whatever his bankers at JP Morgan. Everybody's telling him there's nothing to be worried about this war. It'll be over in 7 days because Trump is going to tackle. Okay. So, and I think this sort of speaks to the fact that I think the majority of Americans continue to have a very, very, I would say, have a very wrong impression about how this war has gone, because it hasn't gone that well for the U.S. If I tell you, we can go through a laundry list. These are confirmed facts that I can tell you about how basically, how badly you could argue, okay, the war has gone for the U.S. I don't know if you are aware, but for example, just last week, okay, Iran damaged 5 U.S. refueling planes, okay, that were parked in an airport in Saudi Arabia, okay. Just last week, Iran destroyed 4 out of the 8 advanced American air defense radars in the entire Middle East. 4 out of 8. And each of these radar costs around $300 million. In case you don't know, okay, just yesterday, USS Lincoln, which is one of the 2 aircraft carriers that was sent to the Persian Gulf, essentially was repositioned away from Iran after coming under attacks from Iran, missile attacks. This follows another aircraft carrier, which is the newest, the most modern U.S. aircraft carrier, USS Gerald Ford, that actually is now on its way to Greece for repair after the laundry room, mysteriously caught fire and 200 sailors apparently were hurt. And they say it was not because of Iran. Okay.
Gerald Ford has a poop problem too. None of the bathrooms work. They're swimming in sewage.
On the way there, absolutely, there was a problem. They claimed that some sailors trying to sabotage the whole entire thing. But what I'm saying to you is that the reason why the Iranians have been able to withstand, and I did a podcast last night on it. I did an interview last night on a podcast hosted by an Iranian dissident. This guy was the producer of the largest Iranian TV station until recently that was broadcast out of London. And then, and I was telling him, it's very simple. Like, because this guy was telling me, like the Iranians themselves, his contacts Iran, like they can't believe that, that the regime in Iran is still standing after what they hear in terms of the U.S. daily bombings, like the amount of bombs that they dropped on Iran over the last 3 weeks should have by now destroyed half the country. The Iranian people actually can't even believe that the regime is still standing. And let me tell you why the regime is still standing. And this is what I was saying yesterday. Because this war really is the first proxy war. And you're hearing this from me first. This is the first proxy war ever between the United States and China. The only reason why Iran is still in the game after 3 weeks of heavy bombing by the combined military might of the U.S. and Israel is because China is basically in the shadow propping Iran up. Let me tell you this, the reason why Iran has been able to hit this U.S. asset, that U.S. military target, this morning, the U.S. admitted that actually the Iranians actually hit, an F-35 fighter. An F-35, just think about that for a second, because F-35, as you know, is a stealth aircraft. It's not something that the conventional radar can't even see it. There's no way they could have taken it down without the help of the Chinese. The reality is that what China has done for Iran, a lot of things we can talk about, but what you need to understand is this. In the past, I would say until very recently, China was allied with Iran, but China was very hesitant to provide Iran with a strategic backstop. Because honestly, the Chinese don't like Muslims any more than anybody else likes Muslim. China's got a huge problem with Muslims in China, okay? So, but in any event, but it was not until Trump's unilateral action against Venezuela that China started to think twice. They're like, well, fuck, this is not acceptable. So they decided to essentially, basically pour resources into Iran. And as a result, in this war, Iran, basically, instead of using the civilian GPS, they're now using the Chinese satellite navigation system. And that is what allowing them to hit U.S., aircraft carriers, airplanes, and so on and so forth. This is what's keeping them in the war. And this is a very, very important thing. I think the market doesn't understand that yet. This is also the reason why Trump cannot quit. Anybody who thinks, oh, Trump is going to, oil price goes up a little bit, he's going to quit. He cannot quit because if I'm right that this is the first proxy war between China and the United States, Trump is not going to go down, basically go into the history book as the first president to lose the first proxy war with China. You think that's going to happen?
Then I have one more question. Why, China can afford to be patient. They've got 4 times our population. They've got 150 million person cities, manufacturing cities. Why should they want to get why can't they just lean back and let the U.S. stew in its own idiocy?
Sure. So Rick, let me tell you this is very, very simple. So let me give it a little bit of history lesson, which is very, very important. We all know about Pearl Harbor, right? But most Americans don't realize, why did Pearl Harbor happen? Because it was pretty reckless, if you ask me. What the Japanese, which are always considered to be very cautious people, all of a sudden they decided to embark on Pearl Harbor. Did they just go totally mad? No, they didn't go totally mad because you know what? 5 days earlier, 5 days before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt announced a total oil embargo on Japan, which would have brought the Japanese economy instantly to his knees because Japan realized, basically imports for his energy supply. So the Japanese, the government went into an emergency meeting for 5 days. And they came out of that meeting saying, well, we can either just basically allow our economy to totally collapse and paralyze, or we can attack Pearl Harbor to weaken the U.S. Pacific Fleet long enough that we can go into Indonesia and Malaysia and take their oil and basically stay there, which is exactly what they did. So basically, in a way, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor because it was left with no choice by Roosevelt. Now, the Chinese understand this very well because why do you think the Chinese been trying to build out this, Belt and Road Initiative? What was that all about? The Belt and Road Initiative was always about building a land bridge from China to the Middle East onto Africa. And what's the purpose of that? Because they're afraid that the U.S. will go ahead and impose a total choke points on China's maritime access to the resources it needs from the Middle East and Africa. So they decided to build an alternative land route. That's the only reason. And I can tell you, the Chinese right now, sitting in Beijing, they're thinking the reason why the U.S. wants to take Iran is because actually it's directly aimed at China. That this is about closing the door that China has to its resources so that U.S. can close it off. That's the bottom line. This is not the Chinese are sitting there thinking, oh, wow, let's just basically let it play out. Because what you need to understand is, I can tell you this. I was working at Bank of America then, okay? And, I was once invited by the Pentagon to go down to Washington to have a chat with a bunch of fucking 3-star generals, right? And then, you know what? I'm a U.S. citizen. I born in Pittsburgh. I was working at Bank of America. I was the most senior, basically, macro researcher at Bank of America. They thought I was completely legitimate, right? And then, and then it turned out that I didn't know until I got down there that what they really want to talk about was China. And there was a session about Huawei. If you remember, Huawei is, the sort of the leading Chinese, technology company, so on and so forth. So there was a whole session about okay, so what do we have to do to destroy Huawei? Okay, this is a conversation 10 years ago, right? This is a conversation, a discussion inside the Pentagon about how we can go about destroying Huawei. So they asked me, David, so what do you think? How do we go about destroying Huawei? I said, well, I'm sorry, excuse me. Before I answer the question, can you tell me why you want to destroy Huawei? I said, let me give you 3 multiple choices. You tell me which one is true. I said, number 1, you want to destroy Huawei because Huawei is stealing American technology. 2, you want to destroy Huawei because Huawei equipment allows China to basically spy on Americans. And 3rd, you want to destroy Huawei because you won't allow any company to compete with the U.S. Okay, that will potentially surpass the U.S. And these generals started laughing in my face. They said, well, David, we thought you're American. Isn't it obvious? Of course, it's 3. Okay? That's all you need to understand. Because right now, the U.S. is falling behind China. And therefore, the U.S. is trying to do everything possible to sabotage China. And this is how the Iranians see it. This is why, like, the whole world, so we're not going to go into this, because this is, in a way, this is why what we need to realize is very simple. This is what, Professor Graham Allison at Harvard calls the Thucydides trap. It's about something that he has done a lot of research on, which he finds in the last 1,000 years. Whenever, a hegemon is being threatened by an upstart, guess what? That always inevitably leads to war. That started with Sparta and Athens. That's why it's called the Thucydides trap, because he's referring to the Peloponnesian War. That the rise of Athens threatened Sparta, and that led to war, and there was not much you can do about it. And that just went on for the next basically 2,000 years. So from that point of view, this is not about right or wrong. It's not about the U.S. doing the wrong thing, or China's doing the right thing, or wrong thing, whatever. This has to do with the fact that China is catching up to the U.S. at a speed that the U.S. decides that we cannot allow this to keep going because it will threaten us. Therefore, they're trying to sabotage China to basically hold China back. Under the Biden administration, they started really under the Biden administration, by the way, that the Democrats, of course, the entity list that was introduced under the Biden administration, which was a blacklist of Chinese companies, which the U.S. was going to block their access to technology. Okay. And this whole, entity list was created by no other than Eric Schmidt, who was the former CEO of Google. Okay. And Eric Schmidt used to brag about the fact that this entity list is designed to set China back by 2 to 3 years. Because he says if we can keep China behind us for 2 to 3 years, given technology is changing constantly, we'll be able to maintain our lead in the foreseeable future.
Speaking of maintaining that lead and everything, just really quickly, David, I did want to get to Sasha, and he's got questions for you and everything. But I did have one question to lead into Sasha. What is your thoughts on, because I know Sasha's a big component of this, but what is your thoughts as a stock analyst of NVIDIA? And it seems like NVIDIA is doing superbly well, and it seems like it's not going to be doing well for a while. But I was just wondering your take on how long this kind of boom of NVIDIA is going to last. David?
Yeah, I think NVIDIA, I personally think we're getting very close. By the way, it's actually, I'm glad you basically brought this up, because it's actually very interesting in the context of what we're just discussing about US versus China, right? Because both the US and China recognize that the biggest war the two countries are waging against each other is in the realm of technology. Because both realize, that this is what's going to determine who's going to be, essentially the hegemon in the New World War. Now, what's very interesting is the two different strategies being pursued by both countries. The US side, Trump's strategy is that we're going to control every choke point of the technology. We want to control chip design, which is NVIDIA, chip basically manufacturing, AI, and hyperscalers. He wants to basically, for the US to control every choke point of this technology, so that the rest of the world wants to basically access technology, they have to rent it from the US. The Chinese basically approach is that Chinese strategy is to make this completely open source, so that we encourage as much competition as possible in order to commoditize the entire technology. So what I'm saying to you is that right now, if you look at NVIDIA or Microsoft, or you're looking at whatever, Micron, all these companies are now trading on the assumption that the US will win this tech war, when it's not clear to me at all which way it's going to go. Because if the Chinese continue to catch up at the rate that they have been over the last 2 years, I'm telling you, within 2-3 years, NASDAQ is going to completely crash. This is the problem. The problem is that China is getting better and better in AI every single day, and it's just an incredible thing. So I can understand. I mean, if you're an American, you will be very, very concerned, because if China overtakes the US, every American is going to be impoverished. I mean, that's the honest truth. Every American will be impoverished as a result. Americans will be poor because all the stocks that they're sitting on, just think about this. Think about this. The U.S. economy is only 20% of global GDP, but the U.S. stock market is 60% of the world stock market capitalization. If this thing bursts, I mean, it's going to be game over. This is why I'm telling you, this is what the background of this Iran war is exactly that. This is about the U.S., as a hegemon of the last 50 years, who are feeling less confident in its ability to basically stay off China, is now doing everything it can, including using force, sabotage China in every single way, in the hope that it can gain an edge. That's what's really going on.
Sasha, do you have anything do you agree with David on every point? Do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I do not agree with David. Uh, you're talking about stable coin? What stable? What are you talking about? It's tied up to US dollar. So if US dollar is coming down against all major currencies, against gold, against silver, against everything. So what's going to happen to stable coins? So if it's tied up to US dollar, it will go down just as well. And there's no demand on stable coin anyway. It's a dead issue. Now the Bitcoin. Bitcoin, it's kind of a thing that you're buying because you believe that there will be even a bigger fool who will buy it from you at higher price and you'll make money. There is no value in Bitcoin. There is no acceptance of Bitcoin. You cannot buy coffee with Bitcoin. You see this cup of coffee, you will not be able to pay by Bitcoin. Even if you get 10,000 Bitcoins, give me a cup of coffee. Sorry, we don't serve. I see. Okay. Now, speaking about Americans, who do you have in mind? What kind of Americans? Half of the country, they don't have $400 cash to pay for some emergencies or anything like that. Are you talking about these Americans? They are dead anyway, with Trump or without Trump. It doesn't matter. Now, what Trump's doing, he's doing, actually, of course, you know that you're asking now for extra $200 billion because as Hexet says, it takes money to kill bad guys. Why $200 billion? Why not have $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $15 trillion in US debt is not now $39 trillion, so it will be $59 trillion. Who cares? US will never, ever pay this debt anyway. It will keep self-financing, distracting itself, but it's not going to pay it out. So there will be much higher interest rates that the investors will demand for parking their money in the treasury bills. It's a laughable matter. So, what makes America with its $1 trillion for military plus another 200 billion or so? But wait a sec. What America does show for its $1 trillion military budget? What? In my opinion, it's a money laundering game. They're buying themselves the most expensive whiskey and caviar and all that stuff. And that's where the money goes. What they produce are shitty ships that they're leaking the shit all over the place and they have to go for repairs. This is $1 trillion military machine. Sorry, it's a scam. There is no $1 trillion war machine. It cannot win the war with Iran. It's pathetic. That's what it is. Now also want to take over Cuba. So 2 Russian ships are now going to Cuba with supplies of oil and gas and all that stuff. I don't see how it will play out. I don't know. But I know that 2 ships are on its way. Chinese are studying very carefully all U.S. moves, how it attacks, how it defends. They even continue to count how many Tomahawks missiles they already used and how many more they left, and what it will take to bring those from the United States to the east, to the Iranian theater, and start using them. And after that, how much will be still left? Are they producing more Tomahawk missiles? Do they have money to do that? They should, because they have $1 trillion budget. So unless they spend all this $1 trillion for caviar and champagne and lobsters dinners, so maybe still have left. So maybe they will produce more Tomahawk and they will use more Tomahawk. So what's the end game? The end game is Trump knew before the beginning of this war, which he started. He knew that he is going badly lose midterm election. So his way to deal with that would be to have a victorious war, a quick war, where he would become a winner, like in Venezuela, like elsewhere else. And maybe he will deal with Cuba, maybe Greenland, maybe Canada, maybe something else. Okay. So that way, that's the only way how Trump could not to lose badly. I don't think he will ever win, but at least not to lose badly, at least hold on to Senate on midterm election. Now that backfires badly. They will not lose midterm elections. They will be decimated. They will be a fraction of Republicans left in the House, and maybe a handful of Senate people. That's the end of story. And finally, the man who was a con artist all his life, who had several bankruptcies, who is a criminal, and American people so, well, okay, we'll give him a chance, or maybe by he will be better than Biden anyway, or Kamala Harris, or like give him a chance, we'll see how bad it is. No, you haven't seen it yet. It's coming. It's a payback time, baby. You wanted criminal in charge? You got it. Now you will pay.
All right, I got another question for David. Are we ever going to get jobs back? So last year of Biden, 2024, we only added 1.5 million jobs. Under Trump, we've added basically zero new. It looks like AI is chewing up jobs like Pac-Man. Like, are we ever going to get jobs back?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. By the way, I just want to say, if you look at actually what happened during COVID, I mean, especially immediately after COVID, which is what we're talking about the last 2 years of the Biden administration, what was interesting was that immediately after COVID, guess what? We saw a massive, surge in the employment in the so-called hospitality and leisure industry. And that is restaurants, that is movie houses, that is Disney World, and so on and so forth. So Americans actually, Americans, obviously they were start of services during COVID. So after COVID, they just went out to eat. They went, and also has a lot to do with Gen Z, that more interested in experience than actually acquiring stuff. And by the way, I don't tell you, leisure and hospitality industry is highly labor intensive. Okay. So I would argue that was the main reason, that was the main driver of what we saw in terms of the hiring spree in 2023 and 2024. Okay. 2025, suddenly, the Americans have gone to a restaurant too much. They were basically taking a chill. I don't know to what extent the slowdown that we saw in employment growth was because somehow, like Trump, whatever it is, I think it has something to do with the fact that, like restaurants, I finished hiring Americans that were, whatever, that the restaurant was not quite as basically a big deal as before. So far, all I can tell you is this. I mean, there's been a lot of very serious reports, trying to quantify the impact of AI on productivity growth, on employment. And so far, guess what? The evidence is practically none. There's very little evidence to suggest that AI has already led to big layoffs. That is outside the tech industry. There's no doubt. AI is taking jobs from software engineers. I mean, for example, I believe that at least 25% of software engineers in the United States are going to lose their job in the next 3 years. Software engineer, there are 4.4 million software engineers in the United States. So you're talking about 1 million software engineers probably are set to lose their jobs because of AI. But so far, the problem with AI is that outside software, outside the tech industry, AI hasn't been good enough. This is the reason why surveys after surveys show that most companies are very slow to adopt AI because they feel like it's not good enough. So I would say that, this whole idea that AI is already like costing jobs, I'm not sure that's the case. And it might be, a lot of companies are probably using AI as an excuse not to hire people. But I think for the most part, I don't think this is something that's obvious. I think rather that I don't think jobs are coming back, just so that for what it's worth. I mean, for one thing, the unemployment rate's very low, actually. And by the way, there's something else. If you're thinking about the total employment situation in the United States, The probably the biggest difference between 2024 versus 2025 in terms of the number of jobs created is that obviously 2025, 2.5 million illegals were basically deported. So that means that these people lost their jobs. Okay, there were fewer people working in the U.S. partly because they were deported, or some of them left voluntarily. But that was a very big difference between the last year under Biden versus the first year under Trump, which is that under Biden, 2 million people came in. Under basically Trump, 3 million people were deported. That's a change of 5 million, and that probably I don't know if that contributed to a 5 million change in jobs, but at least a million, 2 million. I'm sure that was the single biggest driver. So from that point of view, if you're an American, in other words, you're not illegal, the job market is better for you. I mean, of course, many Americans may not want to do the kind of job that the illegals were doing, but certainly if you want to work now, a lot of the illegal, in construction, leisure hours, if you want to basically wash dishes, there are plenty of those jobs around right now.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, David. How you analyze the whole things, I really like it. Thank you for your analyzing the whole point.
Thank you very much.
I just want to add 3 points. Number one, these technologies. I write a book on technocracies, and it's published with innovative academic research publishers from France. Secondly, I just want to discuss about this propaganda, and third, this investment. Uh, right now I'm in Bangladesh. We are observing from Bangladesh, and I'm doing work with the California Institute of Management. We are running climate leadership and strategic AI program, and we identified in these challenging situations why U.S. economy is declining and how they can work. Basically, if U.S. people, what you have, you have a wisdom from your expertise, from your knowledge, Mr. David, and with your wisdom, if you apply this wisdom in industry, if you apply this wisdom for community development, if you apply this wisdom for politics, it can create economic values. It create more jobs. It create more policy. It create more economical improvement. So we do advocacy for uh, human wisdom, and wisdom come from different nations. It's come from China, it's come from USA, it's come from Bangladesh. So we do want to focus on human wisdom, and we identify the people, those who more use technologies. If you are not smart when you're using technology, if you are actually using your smart, you are losing your wisdom, you are losing your capacity. That is one of the concern I have for the Western world. Second, propaganda. Uh, we need good media like Port TV. If you see all of the Western media, like all of the big channel, because they do focus on their own agenda, their own propaganda, and all of the things. They do not invite Bangladeshi people to talk what's going on in South Asia. They never try to understand what's going on in this South Asia because of this Iran and Israel war or these other things. So we need genuine media, and I request everyone, you should invest this kind of media. Those who are not focused on propaganda, those who have real people, real information, and real things. Third, investment. Look, if I see U.S. economy, when Donald Trump he come up with the idea he want to stop U.S. aid, because U.S. aid go for all of the unproductive investment. Secondly, he goes to cut all of the relationship around the world. He said we do not want to invest. We want to protect ourselves. And what's going on right now? We are observing USA won $200 million for this war. First, he said they are utilizing money for unproductive purpose. Now they say they need $200 billion. What does $200 billion means? Even Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, their whole central bank money is not maybe around $40 billion. $200 billion is a very big money. So it's a American people money. It's a American taxpayer money. The politicians of American people, they are utilizing it for unproductive purpose. They can utilize it human capital development. They can utilize investing for the corporation or for SME. And through this process, uh, we are actually losing a great leadership approach. I see there are a lot of smart people from North America, but a lack of good leadership, they are in trouble. So my proposal, focus on uh, talent people, invite talent people in politics. You have all of the technology, all of the money, all of the things, all of the power, but if you do not have smart people in politics, you will lose everything. So these are the 3 points I find and I identified USA is losing right now. They
Yeah.
have to improve a lot.
I think you make a very good case. I think, I think on technology, I think it's been more complicated. I mean, I'll tell you what I think about, because I tend to focus on the geopolitics of technology. We all know that in, technology, there are two aspects of technology. One is who owns the technology, and two, who benefits from technology, right? Now, if you think about this, for example, I mean, forget about AI. Let's go back 20 years ago, during the whole dot-com bubble, right? The whole entire IT revolution came out of the United States for the most part, right? I mean, Microsoft, if you think about this Windows, Apple, like Word, all these things, okay, came out of the United States. Did the Americans benefit from that? Not that much. The rest of the world benefited in a very big way, by the way. Because what happened was, yeah, the US invented computers, but then computers became so cheap that you couldn't make money basically making computers anymore. But for someone like in Bangladesh, a child from a poor school, now all of a sudden, accessing a computer is not so far fetched anymore. So there's no doubt technology that the US has created during the whole IT revolution benefited the world, lifted basically the average income around the world, and so on and so forth. But the US itself did not benefit so much, because in a way it sort of just got taken over, because I don't have to tell you, 99% of the Windows software, the Microsoft Office, so on and so forth, was pirated. Okay? In India, in China, and so on and so forth. So like the Americans invented this stuff, the rest of the world just basically took it and basically didn't pay. That's what Donald Trump is trying to fix right now. Now, we can sit here and argue whether you should be or do that. I mean, because it's just sort of like, if you remember the Greek myth about about Prometheus that stole fire from heaven to bring it to basically humanity, right? But the American business model now is very much about promoting, okay, technology monopolies that control the technology. They're going to they become essentially if you can look at it this way, the chicken that lays the golden eggs. If you're talking about Microsoft, Google, Facebook, whatever, Nvidia, and so on and so forth, these companies, they're now like, you're just talking about whatever, 7 companies so-called the Magnificent Seven, even though they only hire less than 1 million people, tops actually, they now account for 20% of US GDP. So what I'm saying to you is that in a way, yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, and this is why China, that's why India, China, everybody is now understand that you want to benefit from technology, but you also want to control the technology. To control the technology, you have to leapfrog the US. And that's what this story is about. So from that point of view, technology is less now about how to basically make everybody better off, how to basically make the world better off, but it's now about how we actually going to control the technology, how we're going to monetize the technology, because as we all know, the US has gone bankrupt. The US government's gone bankrupt. This is the reason why they need every penny they can get from Microsoft, Google, Nvidia, and so on and so forth. This is why the whole entire US model depends on its ability to milk the cows. And the cows are these technology companies. And this is the reason why this administration is much more defensive. They're trying to ring fence the entire tech sector. This is why the partnership between this administration and Silicon Valley is something we have not seen in US history in the last 50 years. Yes. I mean, Kimberly, you had a question. I mean,
Well, I'll let Rick, because I've just popped in late, but it's a pleasure to see you, and I'm glad that we see you today.
You've gone through some very sophisticated geopolitical reasoning, but then you look at Trump and the people around him, and Trump doesn't seem very sophisticated. Is he really aware of what he's doing, or is it the billionaires who are working through him?
Rick, I mean, listen, I don't want to say anything I'm going to regret afterwards. I mean,
Okay.
listen, I don't have any axe to grind. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I told you, I was born in the U.S. I grew up in Taiwan. I was educated in the U.S. I grew up in Europe, and then I now live in Israel. Donald Trump, for me, I think he's definitely a very talented guy. And by the way, I should tell you this: I did have the pleasure of meeting Trump a couple of times in my life. Okay. One time was actually at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel when he debated, Hillary Clinton, okay, basically just before the 2016 elections. And then the second time, it was actually at the New York Economics Club when I heard him. Now, let me tell you this. So he gave his first speech in his first term. He gave his first speech, okay, about economics at the New York Economics Club, which is sort of like one of these things, like it's a big thing on Wall Street, okay? And literally, I mean, I as you probably know, Trump at the time certainly was very, very unpopular with Wall Street. Wall Street hates him, okay? Most billionaires hate him, and I'll explain to you that afterwards, what I mean by that. I was literally, like, I was the only person who was prepared to give him a standing ovation. Okay, let me tell you this. I was surrounded by all these people who hate Trump. And then guess what? He gave in his speech. It was just absolutely amazing because he must have recited from memory like 50 numbers, like GDP, debt, and whatever it was. And then he spoke like nothing you might have thought that he would speak based on, the way he speaks on TV or doing his campaign rally and so on and so forth. That, guess what? He got a total standing ovation from everybody in the room. And that was a shocking thing. Now, let me tell you something about Trump, just so that to put things into perspective. Now, I told you I grew up in Taiwan. At the age of 15, my parents put me on an airplane and sent me off to one of the most prestigious boarding schools in America, okay, in Western Massachusetts. And, that was in the early 80s. And let me tell you this, I was practically the only, Asian kid at the whole school. And I barely spoke any English at all, by the way. And, I was there with some of the richest kids in America. I still remember, one of the kids, his father actually owned the Chicago White Sox. And every week, his father would actually, send a helicopter to basically deliver some Chicago-style pizzas, okay, to his son and basically some friends. That's what we're talking about here, okay? Now, I can tell you that at the time in America, in the early 80s, when I was growing up in this prep school, where I was the only Asian kid, guess what? It was, America was ruled and dominated by the WASPs, okay? Now, there's no doubt about that. And I got a first taste of it. I was, there was a lot of racism, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I've always said if I could survive that boarding school, I could survive just about anything. Let me tell you this. As you and I know very well, Donald Trump is everything, but he's not a WASP. Donald Trump comes from a Germanic background. Donald Trump's father was in the business of building low-cost housing in the Bronx. Do you think Donald Trump, any time in his life, was ever invited to the best parties on Park Avenue or the best parties in the Hamptons? Let me tell you, the answer is no. Donald Trump, because let me tell you this, I can tell you something else. Talking about real estate. Not so long ago, actually, I was at a charity event, and I met this Jewish guy who comes from one of the wealthiest families, Jewish families in the West Coast. And his family's in real estate. This guy graduated from Brown University in 1982. And we were just chatting around, that kind of thing. He was like, well, because I was working finance then when we met him. He said, oh, well, I always wanted to work in finance. But when I graduated from Brown in 1982, I was told there were no Jews working at JP Morgan. There were no Jews on Wall Street, period. This is the reason why the Jews went into real estate, because the doors to basically banking was not available to them. Now imagine you're Trump. You're Donald J. Trump. You are, the WASPs did not go into real estate because they thought that was a dirty business. They definitely did not go into a low-cost housing business, believe me. This is why Trump always has this chip on his shoulder, because he was rejected by other white people because he was not a WASP. He came from a real estate family. This is the reason why I've always said, Trump, you have no idea how many people I know who said that they have played golf with Trump at some point in time. Any Joe Mo on Wall Street who basically became a member have actually personally played golf with Trump. You know why? Because Trump has no friends. Okay, he created all these basically clubs in order so that he can find people to play golf with him. Let me tell you something else. When I know a banker, okay, who was a banker at Bank of America, who was the only guy at Bank of America who was invited to Ivanka Trump's wedding, okay, which I think was at the Plaza Hotel in New York, if I remember correctly. He said he got there. He said, except for a few blonde people, which were all the Trump families, everybody else was Hasidic Jews. That's it. Okay. Because again, you have to understand, Trump was always held in contempt by Wall Street, by the billionaires. They looked down on him. And this is the reason why we have to understand you've got a president who's got a chip on his shoulder. He's very talented. If he comes across as being insecure, he's vain, and so on and so forth, it's because, the people of his, whatever his background look down on him. And he has had to. So I'm not saying Trump is definitely not a perfect guy. He has a lot of flaws, whatever it is. But he's clearly very talented. And then he's talented also because he's a bit of a chameleon. There are many different faces of Trump. Most Americans have only seen one side of him, but this guy is a complex guy. Okay.
Well, and we're at the top of the hour, and I thank you, David Wu. It's a pleasure to see you. I'm so happy that you're okay. Yesterday, you had to dive out because of an emergency situation. We'll be sending our prayers to you. Everyone, make sure you tune in to Sasa's show. It's on right now. He's giving us an update on the wars in Ukraine and the wars in Israel and other wars. It's a really good show. Again, real people with real stories from around the world is what Pod TV is about and what we have tried to keep it about. We are not sponsored and we're not regulated, so we're not told what we can and can't say. So everyone, take care. Be sure to tune in with us every day at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for World Edition. And hopefully we'll keep seeing David Wu and Rick Rosner and Dr. Sharif and Sasha and Mark Lee. I don't know what happened to him, and Nick. But everyone, stay safe. And until we see you again, take care.
Bye.
Bye.